At this point, I will introduce today's presenter. Our presenter is Jeff Yazinski. Jeff is a senior consulting engineer at OnTrack's Canadian practice in the Edmonton office. He is a computer engineer and an IBM certified deployment professional with over 8 years of Maximo development and database experience. His focus primarily lies in Maximo integrations, customizations, implementations, and upgrades. He has worked on numerous Maximo projects involving clients all over North America. At this time, I'll pass things over to Jeff.
All right. Thank you very much, Brian, for that introduction. All right. Okay, I'd just like to welcome everybody to today's webcast. So this one's going to be called Uncovering Hidden Features and Functionality in Maximo. So I guess in terms of agenda today here, what I'm going to be going through is talking a little bit about all the new Maximo 7.6 feature packs, okay? So what a 7.6 feature pack does now is it contains new functionality. So this new functionality in each of these feature packs is quite often missed, and it's really hard to know exactly what some of this functionality does unless you start looking at the README files and start really digging into exactly what was installed. So we're going to be going through each one of the new feature packs for 7.6, what's been introduced. There's some technical additions, there's also some functional additions. So there's some really cool features that have been added in the past couple of years. The goal of these feature packs is ultimately to add additional end user experience. Okay. We're also going to be going through just a couple less known features and functionality in Maximo. So some of these features that quite often get missed or they're not 100% known about, I guess. So we're going to kind of talk about that a little bit. We'll be going through a live demonstration. And then at the end of it, as Brian mentioned, we're going to be opening up the line for any questions, and hopefully I can answer some of those. All right. So let's get started. So let's kind of go through some of these feature packs, okay? So in Maximo 7.607, they've introduced a little bit of a functionality which allows you to reset passwords without restarting the Maximo server. What they've added is a new action in database configuration, which allows you to perform a live refresh on the server. The live refresh, essentially what it does is it looks at an override path property for a new Maximo.properties file. So some of this new Maximo.properties, so any of the database connection information, allows you to basically refetch from the database from a new server.
Hey,
so that's
Chad,
7.607.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but are you sharing out your PowerPoint or is it a whiteboard that you're going for?
I've got a PowerPoint here.
Okay. I just I'm not sure if we're seeing if the sharing got stopped there.
Okay, let me try this again here.
I'm just looking into the issue.
Sure. I should have my screen shared here. Let me try this again here.
There you go.
How are we looking now? Excellent.
There you go. Perfect. We're on your slide. Okay,
okay,
sorry about that.
Perfect.
Thanks very much.
Yeah, no problem. All right. In Maximo 7.606, what was introduced was a new service request work center. So we're going to talk a little bit more about this later in the presentation and actually show you a little bit of a demo on this. But what this is, it's an easy-to-use work center that can be used on a workstation, a mobile device, and it's a nice and easy way of entering in service requests. So like I said, we'll talk about that a little bit more later. There was also an introduction to a licensed usage monitoring application. All right, so this one you can actually enter in which licenses you have, and then what the system can actually go out and do is go look at your security and actually tell you how many licenses of that type that you have. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that a little bit later as well. And also there is a new workflow application. So they've done some changes to the workflow application, and we'll talk about that too. In 7.605, there was 3 role-based work centers that were introduced. So there's the Business Analyst Work Center, the Supervisor Work Center, and then the Work Execution Work Center as well. So those came in and got introduced in 7605. 7604, one of the main features was the direct print feature no longer uses an applet. So this is kind of a nice feature. It's not directly tied to Java anymore. You do want to ensure that the use applet property is set appropriately so that it actually bypasses the applet and uses basically the different functionality for printing. There was also a download button for Start Center result sets added. So that essentially allows you to pull information from the Start Center using report object structures. So this was an add-on to the improved Start Center configurations for 7.6. From an integration perspective, there was the improved JSON API. So this is basically the JavaScript object notation. So this allows you to essentially be able to access the Maximo objects using the integration object structure. 7603, there was a new authentication protocol introduced. So SAML is an authentication protocol that authenticates to an identity provider rather than an Active Directory. So that was introduced. One of the really cool features that was introduced in 7603 was asset depreciation, and we'll talk a little bit more about this later on in the slides. But asset depreciation was originally introduced in the transportation industry solution, but now it's been built into base Maximo. 7602 and 7601, both of those releases introduced additional reports. So in 7602, there was an invoice cost variance for LIFO and FIFO items. So if your costing structure is last in, first out, it's going to be able to handle that situation. First in, first out is FIFO, so it'll also be able to handle that situation. Right. All right, so let's talk about Workflow Designer. So this was, like I mentioned before, this was introduced in 7606. This no longer uses Java applets, so you're not going to have to have Java installed with a browser. As we know, Chrome no longer is able to run Java applets, so you're going to be able to pull this, the new Workflow Designer up within Maximo itself, which is nice. There still is the old applet version of it, so there is a Maximo.property that you do have to set if you do want to still use the applet version. So that property is mxe.webclient, WF Designer, and then use workflow applet. So if you want to be able to use the applet still, you do want to set that to 1. If you don't want to use the applet and you just want to use the new version of the workflow designer, you do want to set that to 0. All right. There's a couple new features to it. So within the workflow itself, on the routing lines themselves, there's actually an action indicator. So if you have an action within that line, it's actually going to show you a little bit of it's going to note that there is an action actually there. In addition to that, one of the nice things is you can actually hover over certain things. So hover over the line, hover over the actual node itself, and it's going to give you a little bit additional text to tell you exactly what's been set up, what's in there. So that's kind of an added functionality. All right, asset depreciation. And this will be part of the demo as well that I want to show you. So in Maximo 7603, asset depreciation is now base functionality. Like I said, it was originally in the transportation industry solution, which you had to purchase, install, and then configure, but now it's purely in base Maximo. what the depreciation schedule allows us to do is it reduces the value of the asset according to our user-defined period thresholds. So the threshold, you essentially set what kind of method that we're going to be doing for depreciation. So there's two different methods that are available to us. We set the period itself, so how many months. So if it's over a 3-year period, we could set it to 36 months, for example. And then what it does, it's actually going to set up a schedule for you, and you're going to be able to see how much that asset depreciates over a period of time. So you're going to be able to actually make some determination on whether it's a repair or replace decision. Okay, so it allows us to give us a little bit more accurate view of the asset's current value, and allow us to be able to have better decision making regarding the asset's life cycle. All right, so you'll see that within the cost section of the asset itself, it's going to have a field there which tells us the current value of the asset itself based on our depreciation schedule. All right, Maximo Work Centers. So this is it's a brand new app within Maximo 2, and I'll kind of show you that as part of the demo. So there was 3 new work centers introduced in 7605. These are role-based work centers, and the 3 that we have available to us are Business Analyst Work Center, Work Supervision Center, and the Work Execution Center. All right, so the Business Analyst Work Center allows us to export data, convert data to different formats, so essentially allows us to work with different data sets. It also allows us to view KPIs, monitor any of the performance of our assets, things like that, okay? The Supervisor Work Center allows us to manage the workload of our team of technicians. It also allows us to be able to assign work to them. So it's a nice and easy UI to be able to do some of that work. The Technician Work Center or the Work Execution Work Center allows us to manage all of the assignments. So if you've been assigned something, you can actually view the work order, you can view any of the planned labor, planned materials, and it allows us to be able to complete that assignment right directly on the screen. So it's a nice and easy way to be able to do that. And as part of the demo, I'll be able to show you that as well. All right. So the Service Request Work Center. So this was a relatively new add-on as well. So this is kind of the 4th work center that was added. So there was 3 added in 7605. There was a 4th one added in 7606, and this one is the Service Request Work Center. So this one allows us to submit a service request into Maximo. So it's a very easy to use form. As you can see, kind of the couple screenshots on the screen. It's very wizard-like, and it's got images based on the type of service request that you want to enter into Maximo. We also have the ability to monitor the status of the existing service requests that you have submitted. And when we're submitting a service request, we basically submit the request of what type of or category it is. We identify a location, we define the asset, and then ultimately we provide a description for that service request. So very similar processes of what we're doing directly in Maximo if you're leveraging the service request functionality, but this allows us to be able to use the different tool, which is a little bit different of a UI. To push it directly into Maximo. All right, another new feature that came out. Essentially what this is it's a new license tracking application, and this is available in 7606, all right? This allows us to track license purchases, renewals. It allows us to be able to, what we need to do is ultimately create a new license record. And it essentially is going to keep track of everything that we own and what is actually deployed, all right? it is only compatible right now with authorized and concurrent user licenses for Maximo, and then a few add-ons. So it does not currently track limited user licenses, but I'm certain that, I'm sure it'll be added sometime in the future. One of the key parts with this one is users will not be assigned a license if the access is not exactly the same as what's defined in the Applications tab within this application. So there is a little bit of setup that you do need to ensure is done to be able to pull the actual licenses deployed into the actual licenses application so it's properly tracked. So there's a little bit of work that you do need to do there. In addition to that, it doesn't obviously prevent overuse of licenses, so it's not going to prevent you from adding a new user. There's none of that functionality that's there. All right, so it's purely just from an audit purposes, so you can actually see how many licenses you own and how many are actually deployed. All right, so there's a couple reports that are provided with this application as well. So there's the license usage detail history report, and then also the license usage summary history report. So those two do come deployed with Maximo, starting with Maximo 7606. All right, another feature that I find is it's not used quite frequently, but I find that it's very helpful for users once it's set up. So this has actually been around for quite some time. I just don't see it leveraged very often. But what it allows for easier and quicker data entry. So once it's set up, basically, when you type something into the attribute, very similar to what you see on the right side of the screen in the image, it's going to automatically drop down some of the available options that we do have for that field. All right. This is set up in App Designer, so it's a very simple setup. What you have to do is actually go to the text box properties for that specific attribute, and then if you click the Advanced tab, what you see is there is a Configure Type Ahead field or a button that pops up, which allows you to be able to configure some of this type ahead information. This is available in 7.5 in one of the earlier 7.5 versions when the asynchronous data validation came into it. So the type ahead does require that asynchronous data validation, and it must be enabled on the server. In Maximo 7.6, this is defaulted by any new install. Maximo 7.6 does have asynchronous validation enabled, so there's nothing you need to do there. So this is an interesting little feature that I don't see used very often. All right. All right, so another feature that I don't see, there is some confusion, I guess, and I don't see a lot of people using this to the full extent. So in work order tracking, we can plan out materials for that specific work. So on the materials in the plans tab, and when you scroll down within the work order tracking screen, we can plan out materials. There is a reservation type field there, and the three options that we have available to us are automatic, hard, and soft. All right. So the hard reservation, this is a time-sensitive reservation. So hard reservations are based on really first in, first out, and these do reduce the quantity available in the storeroom. All right, so if you do plan out a material and that work order does get approved, you're going to see within that specific inventory record for that item and storeroom, you're going to see that the quantity available field does have one less. All right, so that is the hard reservation scenario. For soft reservations, this is not a time-sensitive reservation, so it really does not decrement the quantity available in the storeroom. So there's no, it's not subject to a time frame. So there's no decrement of the quantity available. All right. So when you set that field to automatic reservation type, there is a cron task which actually evaluates that reservation, and it modifies essentially that reservation as necessary. So the cron task name is called inventory res type update cron task. And what this cron task does is it performs a calculation essentially on that reservation, and it's going to set the type of reservation to soft or AP soft or AP hard, depending on the required date of that item. All right? So the calculation is essentially, it looks at the required date, and if the required date is less than the system date or the current date, plus the inventory lead time for that item, plus the inventory processing lead time. This inventory processing lead time value is a static value, and this comes from our inventory reorder organization setting. So by default, it's set to 0, but you can ultimately modify that as you need. Okay. If it's true, it's going to be set to hard. All right, so that essentially means that your required date is within the lead time and the inventory processing time. So there is essentially it is time sensitive. If it's set to false, there is no time sensitivity to do with this, right? So you're outside of the lead time period. So really what it does is it's going to set it to AP soft. So AP hard is going to actually decrement the quantity available. AP soft will not. There's also another reservation type that you can't actually set, and that's called backorder. And the backorder type is set on, well, basically there's 2 criteria. The first criteria is when a hard reservation is required, so when that calculation is true, and essentially the system does not allow a negative balances, and we cannot actually decrement the quantity available. So there is nothing available, and it is a hard reservation. So that's going to trigger the type to be of backorder type. All right. So let's get into a little bit of a demonstration. So I've got about 10-minute demonstration here, and then we'll open it up for some question and answers. So let me bring up Maximo. Okay, so what I'd like to do first here is start off with talking about the work centers. So like I mentioned, there's been a couple additional work centers, so there's 4 there. The 3 were introduced with 7605. There was the additional service request work center added in 7606. These work centers actually are accessible by a completely different URL than you would with Maximo. Okay, so generally speaking, Maximo you access through the server name /Maximo, very similar to what we see on the screen here. Whereas the actual work centers, you would access through the server name /Maximo-X. All right. So if you do have Maximo with 7605 or greater, you should be, if it's been deployed, you should be able to access these work centers. There is a little bit of setup in terms of security that needs to be done with these, but this is available to you with 7605 and newer. So I'm going to go ahead and log in to the work center here. So this takes the exact same username and password as Maximo. So I'm going to log in here. Right now, this user has access to 2 different workstations. So I've logged in, very similar to kind of our start centers. If you go to the top left, you'll see there's several workstations or work centers that this user has access to. So right now I've set this person to have access to the self-service work center and also the technician work center or the work execution work center. All right. So right now we are looking at the technician work center. So there's a few things that we have available to us. On the left-hand side here, we have any of our open assignments. So you'll see here that there is a 1 here, which indicates that we do have an open assignment for today. So this is essentially, it's a work order that I've been assigned to that I need to actually take action on. So what I can do is I can take a look to see exactly what this work order entails. So it provides me the current status. It tells me what my asset and location are. It gives me a little bit of additional information in terms of scheduled start, scheduled finish. I do have the ability to click start here, which is going to actually start the work. I can pull up additional information by clicking directly on the work order number itself. And on the top here, I have the ability to be able to take a look at if there's any tasks. So this specific work order does not have any tasks on it. I can look at any planned materials. So if there's any planned materials, this one has 1 planned material, item 0-0048. If there was planned tools, I have the ability to view those as well. And then lastly, there is planned labor. All right, so if we've planned out labor on that work order, it's going to be able to show exactly what that is. We can complete that work order. So what that's going to do is it's going to complete the assignment, and then potentially there's some other workflow process that we could trigger or some other process which is going to push that work order along. All right. On the right-hand side, here's some contacts, all right? So there's some, essentially these are labor entries, so there's a few contacts here. In case we need to contact somebody, you have the ability to do that. So I'm going to switch over here. So like I said, this was the technician work center or the work execution one. Now I'm going to switch over to the self-service one. So switching over to the 2 different work centers is very simple. On the top left-hand side of the screen, we can now switch it to the self-service one. All right. So as part of the presentation, like I mentioned, we do have the ability to view open service requests. Okay, so these are all a bunch of open service requests. I do have the ability to cancel them. I can view a little bit more information about these as well. All right. I can view the history. So history is going to be essentially any service requests that I have submitted in the history or in the past. I can also create a new service request. All right. So clicking the new button is going to be able to pull up my different categories. So I've got my different categories here. This is just the Maximo demo system, so these are just by default the ones that show up. And it's going to be a little bit of a tool which I can step through. So for example, if I click Office and Cubes, it's going to essentially move me through a little bit of a wizard, which allows me to describe the issue, provide essentially an asset or location for that issue, and then describe what the problem is, all right? So what I can do is these are, like I said, these are just out-of-the-box descriptions. So I can click this trash needs to be collected, click next, and you'll see it's a little bit of a wizard, right? So additional comments, trash is overflowing in kitchen. I can click next. I can add a photo or video of the issue. So this is more for our mobile devices, but if I'm working off my workstation, I can certainly add an attachment to this. if I do add a photo to this, it's going to go back into the attached documents or use the attached documents functionality within Maximo. So I'm going to click no. Now, the next step is, where is that issue located? So I can either search for my location. If we've got a hierarchy structure that shows up here, I can easily just simply click, and what it does is it's going to drill into each of the locations. And then what I can do is I can set the location. All right. I can define the asset if I wish. This is optional. So I'm just going to simply skip this step. And then I can set it to be high priority or not. Right. So once I've submitted that request, I can click Submit Request. It's going to enter the service request directly in Maximo. And then if there's any workflow or however it may process within Maximo, you can leverage that. All right. So I'm going to move over to Maximo now. Just going to go log off of this. And now I'm going to move into Maximo. So this is our regular Maximo screen now. I'm going to sign in. Just have to redo that login. All right, so we've got Maximo up. Now what I want to show you is just something, a depreciation schedule that I've easily set up here previously. So I'm going to go into our Assets application. I'm going to click Assets. All right, I'm going to go find my asset. All right, so the asset that I previously set up was 11,480, and I'll pull up my asset itself. So the new functionality with depreciation schedules is found in the More Action section here. There's quite a bit of information on the left-hand side here. So I find the easiest thing is to go back up to this navigation item, just search in something similar to what you're looking for, and now it's going to find it, okay? So I just typed in DEP. I could put in another letter, and now it's found exactly what my More Action was. Okay? So you can either do that, or if you feel like you can go down and find it specifically yourself. Right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull up my depreciation schedule. You'll see that there is one already created here. So I've got my depreciation schedule. So I've set up a starting cost, a salvage amount. So the salvage amount is essentially what it's going to be when it's fully depreciated at, what the cost is going to be. And now I can pull down my depreciation schedule, and you'll see here is exactly what I've set up. All right, so you go through, you set up the method, so it's either a straight line or a double declining balance depreciation schedule. So this is going to indicate how fast it actually depreciates, whether it depreciates lots at the beginning of its life, or if it's a linear depreciation schedule. We set our period date, our period type, which is a date depreciation. We also have the ability to set a meter depreciation, so on something similar to run hours, for example. We'll scroll down. We can set our periods and our period units. So essentially our full depreciation is going to occur over 60 months. And that's essentially what's going to show up once I've set this and hit OK. My schedule will show exactly what my depreciated value is, how much it's depreciated every month, the total depreciation. So you'll see that it goes from $13,500 each month all the way down to our salvage amount of $2,000. All right. If I hit OK, I can now scroll down, and you'll see my current value is shown on the asset itself. And so what you can do is now you can potentially build a report out, and that's going to help you out with some of your budgeting, potentially your determination between repair, replace, things like that. All right. So that's the end of my demo. So what I'd like to do now is I'm going to hand it back over to Brian, and what we can do is kind of go through a little bit of a Q&A, and hopefully I'm going to be able to answer some of your questions, and we'll open up the line.
Okay.
Yeah, so I'm just looking at the chat window here. So Scott had mentioned, or Scott had asked, does this cost depreciation app calculate the current and future replacement cost? No, it doesn't. So it purely takes account, it really just does the depreciation schedule. So if you needed to do some additional calculations, it's certainly doable. As we know, with automation scripting, you could even do an ad hoc report with a calculation in it. There's a lot of cool functionality that we can do for calculations now, so it's possibly you could do something like that. Another question so hopefully that answers your question. Certainly feel free if there's some additional, something additional there, feel free, Scott, to email me. I'll put my email address back up on the screen here very shortly. What license level is required to see the service request work center? So I guess one of the key things is the work centers don't change the licensing. So if you have the ability from a licensing perspective to enter in a service request in Maximo, you have access to enter the service request within the work center. So a self-serve license I believe is sufficient. Okay, I can confirm that though. All right, I see Jim. Jim's got a question there. So the technician work center. So the PM schedule shows the start and stop time to be 1 hour. The planned labor was shown to be 2 hours. How is that associated? So I believe, so let me just, I believe that's the estimated duration. So let me pull up the work center here. I'm going to log out of Maximo here and then log back into our work center. All right, so the PM schedule shows the start and stop time to be 1 hour. So we've got our 1 hour right here, right? The planned labor was 2 hours. So they are different. So this scheduled start and scheduled finish time would come from essentially the PM itself, and it would be the duration, right? So the scheduled start was essentially when the PM generated that work order. The scheduled finish itself this date would have come from because the estimated duration of the PM was 1 hour. So these are independent of one another. So like our planned labor may include travel time or something like that. So they are slightly different. So hopefully that answers your question. Perfect. So it looks like it did. All right. I'm going to put my contact information back up on the screen. Any other questions?
There are quite a few coming through. Are you seeing all the questions coming through on the chat there, Jeff?
Oh, maybe not.
If not, I can ask them. I didn't know how many you were seeing. It looked like you were able to see a few of them there.
Let me see if I can. I only see a few of them for some reason. So maybe I'll have to.
I'll moderate here. So forgive me.
Sure.
There's a lot coming through. I'm trying to organize them. So if you've already answered it, maybe you could just tell me, and I'll move on to the next one.
Yeah.
Talking about asset depreciation, does it take into consideration PM and CM activity cost?
It doesn't, no. The asset so does the asset depreciation take into consideration the actual costs itself? It doesn't, no. So the thing is, let me go back into Maximo here. Just going to sign out here, log back in here. So I'm pulling up this one. So this asset, the current value does not take into any costs itself. So any of our costs are above that. All right. So really, this current value is purely for reference only. So if there's some sort of process that you want to follow to be able to analyze this data itself, you probably would need to possibly write a report, maybe do an escalation or something along those lines to be able to leverage this data itself. Okay, but this current value purely comes from our depreciation schedule, so it allows us to be able to reference that. And then how you use this with your other costs. Okay, so these other costs are just out of the box Maximo. So, if you've issued out inventory to repair this asset, things like that, that's essentially part of the process or what you need to do. So, I guess the answer is no.
Okay. I've got another question from Kevin. He's asking, is there any performance hit when using type ahead?
So there is, obviously it does have to synchronize all of that data to the browser. Anytime that I've used it, I have not seen a performance hit. The standard, I guess, criteria applies. You want to make sure that your servers are sized properly to be able to send that data. You probably don't want to be able to put type ahead on every single field on the screen. The occasional field which helps out the user to be able to enter in their data. Sure, I've never seen an issue with that. I think just common sense, I guess, you don't want to put it on every field. But I have not seen a performance hit.
All right, a question from Holly. Is there setup required for the license functionality?
A little bit, yes. Okay, so let's actually pop into the license application. So I guess it's going to be twofold. It really depends on how your security is currently set up, right? Hopefully, because this is new functionality, hopefully it somewhat aligns with how the license usage monitor is set up. But if I pull up the license usage monitor application itself, I've set up a couple licenses here, and you'll notice one thing is all of my licenses deployed say 0. The reason for that is if you click, so I've clicked into this license, if you click on the applications, all of these applications automatically get filled out, okay? What you have to do then is go through and set the access level for each one of these modules to be able to say, okay, if I have this is considered a authorized license, okay? So what it does is it checks for any users that have this exact criteria, and then if it satisfies that criteria, it's going to say, okay, there is one license available or one used or deployed license for that. So there is a little bit of setup that needs to be done for sure. There is a couple queries that I found which actually kind of join this license, essentially this table. So it's going to allow you to actually be able to, it's going to facilitate the setup of that. So if you want a query, if you want that query, feel free, send me an email. I don't mind sharing that sort of thing. So send me an email and I can get that query to you.
Great, thanks. Question from Mary. I think this was asked while you were showing some other demo, so I hopefully will be able to interpret it. But she's asking, can these work centers be configured? I'm not sure which these refers to, though.
So I guess any of the 4 work centers, and they can be. So I guess They're not so much configured, but they would be a little bit customized. So it's not like configuring a Maximo application screen where we've got the application designer application. We can drag and drop things in and off the screen. So there is no tools readily available to us for changing the Work Center screens. So it is actually changing some of the code that actually visually shows that. So they can be changed. It's just, it's not like simply easily changing a Maximo screen through App Designer.
Okay, thank you. Jennifer's asking, I notice you keep switching from Maximo to Work Center. Can you have two tabs open? Sorry, can you have two tabs open in your browsers and be logged into both? And can you show the security settings to activate the Work Center? Sure.
So the first part of that question, I guess the reason why I keep logging off and logging on is because I'm logging onto Maximo as a different user. So I'm logging into Maximo as Max Admin, and I'm logging into the Work Centers as a different user. So, the way that browsers work, these two browsers are going to share caches, so there's going to be a cache problem. I believe there is a way of doing it for sure. So if I log in here, okay, so I'm logged in. You notice how it kind of kicked me out here? And that's because they both share individual caches, right? So what you would have to do is there's ways of actually separating the caches, so you could potentially log into both. But yeah, it's doable. It's just you just have to make sure that they don't share each. Chrome doesn't share, or Internet Explorer doesn't share caches between each browser. Okay. The second part of that question was, let's go back into Maximo here, and I'm going to pop up security. So if I go to, just trying to remember which security group, you'll see there is a Work Center. Okay, so this is a new field that was added, and I believe this was added when the 3 additional Work Centers were introduced. So as of 7605. So I have created this group, and what I have to do is I have to specify which Work Center anyone in this group has access to. Okay, so that's really it. It's pretty simple. And then if I click the Users tab, my user exists there. Okay, so that's going to provide Diane here access to the technician Work Center when they log in, or when she logs in. So hopefully that answers your question.
Okay, good. Thanks, Jeff. A question from Doug. Why are Work Centers broken out from Maximo? Would users be logging in and out to go back and forth from one to another?
Yeah. Well, I guess the reason why it's separate is it's a completely different application. So, and that's really why it is separate. So if I log into WebSphere, just to kind of give you an idea, it is truly a different application. So if I go down to applications, applications, and I show you application types and WebSphere Enterprise Applications, you'll see, so Maximo is all contained within this maximo.ear file, which is the enterprise archive, which contains all the source code. The way that IBM developed the Work Centers is to be completely separate from Maximo, okay? So they've created a completely new web application. It is still the same authentication. It still connects to the exact same database. Maximo does have to be up and running for the Work Centers or Maximo.x to run, but it was just essentially the way that IBM has developed it to be completely separate applications.
All right. Another question from, or not from another one, but another question. This one is coming from Richard. Regarding the property for using applets for WF Designer, I missed how you can change that. I do not see that property in our system under System Properties. Does that need to be updated on the server rather than in the UI?
So I guess I don't know off the top of my head whether it's a live refresh property or not. So I'm just let me just refresh my mind exactly which property that was. So let's go back to my slide here. So we're talking about the Use WF applet property, if I'm not mistaken. So this one, if I go back into Maximo here, and I'm going to pull up the properties, system properties. I may not have it. I'm not sure. So there it is. Okay. So I've got it. So I'm not 100% certain why you wouldn't have this property. So I guess it's hard for me to comment on that. But you'll see, so MXE Web Client, WF Designer, Use WF Applet, you'll see that this is a live refresh property. So live refresh essentially means that I can change the current value, refresh it, and then it's going to be live. So we actually don't need to redeploy Maximo. We don't have to change the Maximo properties. We don't need to do anything like that for this one. All right. In terms of, if you don't have it, I'm not sure why it wouldn't be there, I guess. So
maybe you could take that offline if Richard wants to send you an email.
Yeah, and that's fair. Yeah, not a problem, Richard.
Okay, I've got two more questions, one from George and one from Deb. If I missed yours, maybe send it through, or if you've got a question that you haven't asked it yet, please send it through. We're getting close to the end here. So George is asking, for asset depreciation, can I set it to be based on a function or an asset condition?
No. So there is some restrictions in place for that, unfortunately. So we really just have two options. So if you need to do, something a little bit more flexible, I guess, I'd have to investigate a little bit. But we really only have the two methods available to us for depreciation. So, but we could do some sort of calculation in addition to this. So if I go back to my depreciation schedule, these two methods are really what we have available, the double declining balance and the straight line. So unfortunately, no, we're not going to be able to do anything different there. But Maximo is very flexible with calculations, like I mentioned. So it's possible that you could do something different here. It's possible that we add another field here, right? And then based on the depreciation or based on, some other criteria that you're looking at, it would be very simple to create an automation script that does some sort of calculation that pulls in some of the information from the depreciation value, possibly, your total cost, and then does a calculation. So if that criteria is known, automation scripts are very powerful in the sense that we can do something very simple.
Okay, last question, unless more come through, is from Deb. Are you able to make the asset required when putting in a work order in the system?
An asset required. So you're talking, I guess, so when I go new work order, this asset, absolutely. So we can make any field required. And this is done simply in the App Designer application. So Maximo has an Application Designer application. All right, so this is found in the System Configuration, Platform Configuration. And this is going to allow us to be able to build out our applications. And one of the functionality within that app allows us to be able to make fields required, read only. It's going to be able to pull off fields. I can conditionally change some of the fields as well. So this is a very simple change done through App Designer.
Great. All right, thanks, Jeff. We don't have any more questions coming through. Maybe you can throw up your contact information slide there, Jeff.
Absolutely.
So if there are questions that you think of after the presentation here, feel free to shoot those over to Jeff, and he'll get back to you shortly. At this point, I really want to thank everybody for attending the webcast today. So at this time, on behalf of everyone at OnTrack Consulting, I want to say thank you to all of you for joining us today. I hope you found the presentation worthwhile, and we hope to see you again in the future. This concludes